Hello, and a very warm welcome to one and all to another episode of the Leadership Spotlight series, organized by the International Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Society Women's Special Interest Group. I am Dr. Sneha Kamath, a young neurologist and movement disorder specialist from Bangalore, India. As we all know, the Leadership Spotlight series aims to motivate and support women scientists and clinicians engaged in the field of movement disorders across the globe by introducing us to inspirational leaders in the MDS. In continuation with this thought, today we will be interviewing Professor Kristen Klein. Professor Kristen Klein is a professor of neurology and neurogenetics. She has an illustrious career, having started medicine in multiple prestigious universities, including Hamburg, Heidelberg, Lübeck, London, and Oxford, and also having completed internships in Stockholm, Rennes, Wollongong, and Vitebsk. She moved to Boston from 1997 to 1999 for a fellowship in molecular neurogenetics with Dr. Exo Brakefield and completed her neurology training at Lübeck University in 2004. Following this, in a series of summer sabbaticals in movement disorders with Dr. A. Lang in Toronto, Canada, she has worked from 2004 to 2015. She was appointed the Littenberg Professor at the Department of Neurology of Lübeck University in 2005, where her research has focused on the clinical and molecular genetics of movement disorders and their functional consequences. In 2009, Dr. Klein was appointed the Schilling Professor of Clinical and Molecular Neurogenetics at the University of Lübeck, and she has become the director of the newly founded Institute of Neurogenetics in 2013. While she has educated and accelerated the career of several former doctoral students and mentees, she has also developed a strong publication history, having published more than 500 scientific papers, and has an H factor of 116 with more than 60,000 citations. She is the deputy editor of Movement Disorders, the former deputy editor of Science Advances, and former associate editor of Annals of Neurology. She has served as a chair of the Congress Scientific Program Committee in 2016 and 17 annual congresses, and she was the president of the German Neurological Society in 2019 and 20. She is the current chair of the European section of the Movement Disorder Society, and she's also the lead of the monogenic network of GP2. She was elected a member of the National Academy of Sciences Leopoldina in 2021. And with this, I would like to introduce you to Professor Kristen Klein. Hello, ma'am.
Hello, Dr. Kamath. It's very, very kind of you. I would like to thank you so much for your very kind introduction, and I would like to welcome everyone here on the program. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor and pleasure.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So beginning with your interview, I'd like to pose you the first question. Can you walk us through the highlights of your career?
Yes, very happy to do so. So you mentioned them briefly already. So yes, I trained here in Germany mostly, but then I had the enormous pleasure and privilege again to go to London, to Queen Square. And I, at the time, well, I'm old enough to still have had the enormous opportunity to meet David Marsden, Anita Harding, and Neil Quinn. And that was a true inspiration. So that was definitely the first movement disorder related highlight. I later continued with my clinical training, and then was fortunate enough to be able to join Xandra Brakefield in Boston at Harvard University. They had just at the time, she and her then senior staff member, Laurie Ozelius, had just found the DYT1 gene or TOR1A gene. And so this was a very exciting time. And so I was able to learn some molecular biology there and then returned home. And then, as you mentioned, I again had a wonderful opportunity, and I joined Professor Tony Lang for a series of 11 summer sabbaticals in Toronto to learn more about clinical movement disorders, and also, of course, to conduct research projects with him and his group. And then you mentioned other highlights. Definitely, the Movement Disorder Society engagements are absolute highlights of my work, as is GP2. And if you ask me what is the biggest highlight of it all, is probably to be able to work with so many wonderful people across the globe. This is actually something I always wanted to do, even when I was still a small child. I loved a little book that was my absolute favorite book when I was a child, which was about children all over the world. And I wanted to play with all of these children, and now I think I have an opportunity now to interact with all these wonderful people through MDS and these other projects.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Like you mentioned, you've been in touch with a lot of leaders, but then you've also shaped the lives of others as a leader. What has been your experience as a woman in navigating the path as a leader in this field of movement disorders?
Yes, very happy to try and answer that. So, first of all, I should say, I was born in 69. And so when I started my career, my first Movement Disorders Congress that I attended was in 1996. I was a very young doctor then. And at the time, I was one of very few women. And this situation, I think, is very different from today. At the time, I was also the very first woman ever at Lübeck University in neurology. I think people could really, really not even envision that a woman could be part of a neurology team. So I think times, although I feel not that ancient, and I do appreciate that a lot has changed since that time. So in a way, that also worked to my advantage, though, because I was one of the very few examples, and then I started having even 2 children. That was even rarer. So I was one of these examples that people like to kind of almost showcase, and I was invited to all of these things: women and children, and women in career, and women in this and that. And so I think that was, in a way, and in fact, I never had a disadvantage, but rather because it came at this really opportune time when, at least in Germany, people had thought, maybe we should do something for women, and there were so few women, so that I benefited from that. However, I have also, and I had a wonderful role model, I should say. First of all, also really my mother and my grandmother, who always worked, which was not necessarily the rule, but rather the exception, at least in our country. And then Zandra Brakefield, my mentor in Boston. And she, at the time, was my age now. And probably had gone through something really difficult to get to that stage at that time. And so that was another wonderful role model for me. And then I just tried to also help whenever I had an opportunity to create opportunity for others. So when I was, for example, president of the German Neurological Society, there were, again, new programs that we set up, also for medical scientists, for example, and also with a focus on women in particular. Also men, of course, that, take part in childcare. And so I think so that gave me wonderful opportunities. And finally, maybe at least in genetics, there always were a lot of women. So I never actually felt so much lack of women, although I know it's very different in other areas, maybe also of movement disorders. And so that way, we always, and many of those have now, gone to other places and are leading scientists themselves. And so that way, I think, I don't want to sound too arrogant, but maybe that way we could also set an example how this may work. And a lot of them, maybe that's the last thing I'll say, a lot of them also have children. In fact, I calculated this. Our average number of children is 2.3 here at the Institute, which is a lot higher than the average, at least in Germany. And so we're thinking that's a good ratio.
That is a good one. So, but having children, having a career and a family, it kind of brings us to the age-old question. Do you have any tips for maintaining a work-life balance?
Yeah, so thank you for that question, and I can answer that very quickly. I can only say no, because because I have to admit, from the very beginning, when I first heard about this concept, it was very foreign to me. I think this idea of having a complete dichotomy between work and life, I find that actually still quite strange. I know what it means, and of course, I appreciate time off with the family and all of that, but to kind of separate my work from my life, or my life from my work, that I think is not a good idea. And if you really want to, if you're interested in pursuing a career, and really, and really take on responsibility, then this is going to be very difficult. And maybe let me give you an example before I try to answer your actual question. But when I was when I had just returned from Harvard, I wanted to have children. That was always, always a great wish of mine, of our family, my husband, and I became pregnant. And then I had a very small group. I had very little money at the time, so it was mostly medical students, but they were wonderful. And so I told them I'm pregnant. And then, of course, they were shocked, because in Germany at the time, that meant really pretty much, for the next 3 years, nothing is happening. And then one of the students came up to me and said, and looked at me, eyes wide open, and she said, "Christine, don't forget, you have a family here too." And that was not only the sweetest thing she could say, but it was also something extremely encouraging. And it helped me over the years when I was thinking, Well, I have this other I have two families. I'm very lucky. I have two families. Oh, I have a big family maybe. And sometimes there's time when I have to take care of that family. And so coming back to the work-life balance, when you're really responsible for people in a lab and for their careers and for their, results and work and everything, it's hard to say, I'm not available. You don't tell that your children either, right? So you don't do that. And I tried not to do that. That doesn't mean that I don't have time off and that I really switch off and then I say, okay, I'm not reachable for a week. If you want something, go to this or that person, or if there's something really urgent, call me on my phone. So I'm doing things like that also to, focus on something else, enjoy just, very private time with the family or friends. I'm doing that. But overall, I have always been very happy combining work and life and making, each other part of each other. But the more traditional tips and tricks, I think is really most people, and that is true for me as well, do need some private time, and that time needs to be protected, and people need to be mindful of that. But that's again what you do with your family too. You also tell your kids, "Mommy needs a break now, right? So for the next 2 hours, don't do anything." So I think to me that's the best advice I can give. And yeah, and I'm sorry if this is not exactly what you were expecting.
No, but it was truly a heartwarming story. I mean, looking at work as another extension, another family, as also your family, as also family, and balancing the two, that's like a real brilliant piece of advice. Look at both of them as extension of each other and do not dichotomize between them. Coming to the final question, which we want to ask you today, what's your biggest piece of advice for women pursuing a career in movement disorders?
Yes, so maybe I'll start with something which sounds a little trivial. So one size does not fit all, right? So that's, I think, very, very important. People are at different stages, people have different ambitions, but for sure, and this is the advice that I got from my parents, do what you really want to do, and then you'll be good at it. And then you'll find the support, you'll get the support, you'll find people that support you, do that. And that is true, however, also for men. So, however, never be discouraged, to try things that you would like to do. And there's always a solution to every hurdle and every problem. It is not easy. I'm not saying it's always easy, especially for women. And especially if you're really planning to have a family and children and everything. It is not easy. And you have to be able, and you have to ask that maybe yourself, because expectation management is something really important. I learned that especially when I did my presidency, at the German Neurological Society, which is large, 12,500 members. And so a lot of women came to me and also asked for advice, and they were under the impression that they could do everything part-time, their neurology training, their academic career and everything. And that's not quite the case. It's after all a lot of work. So let's be realistic, but if you really want to do it, go for it and look for one or two really good mentors that help you on your way. That's I think then a good recipe.
Thank you so much, Professor Klein. That's like really wonderful advice. So I think with this, we've come to the conclusion of today's interview. It was truly a great, honorable moment for me to be interviewing you. And I really appreciate you for taking out your time and being here with us for the Women's SIG, Women's Movement Disorder Society interview. Thank you.
Thank you so much for interviewing me and for having me. Thank you. And good luck to everyone.